Welcome back, my students. Dr. Ogwe here, and today I bring you cardiac action potentials. That's chapter 31 from Guidance Physiology, and we are going to start with the learning objective number first, that is describe the ionic basis of the low action potential of the SA node. So it has three learning objectives, and we are going to start with the learning objective number first. No need to write anything. The notes of this video are in the description of the lecture. So we are starting with action potential in SA node. Let us suppose this right here is an SA nodal fiber. This right here is an SA nodal fiber. And this is the membrane of the SA nodal fiber. And if we measure the voltage changes across this membrane, we put one electrode here and another electrode here. That is one inside the membrane and other outside of the membrane. And measure the changes in voltage across this membrane. These voltage changes are called action potentials. Since this voltage change is across the membrane of SA nodal fiber, so they are action potential of the SA node. If this membrane was of narrow fiber, then this action potential would have been the action potential of narrow fiber. So action potential of SA node. It is important. It is exclusively for heart rate generation. Action potentials in SA node is exclusively for heart rate generation. That is why SA node is known as dominant pacemaker of heart. Why pacemaker of heart? Because it generates heart rate. And why dominant? Because it has highest rate of impulse generation. Clear? There are other pacemakers in heart, but only SA node is dominant because it has highest rate of impulse generation. Other pacemakers have low rate of impulse generation. So SA node is called a dominant pacemaker of heart. This property of heart rate generation is known as chronotropy. And we have some factors which increase heart rate. Those are positively chronotropic. And we have some factors which decrease heart rate. Those are negatively chronotropic. For example, sympathetic nervous system is an example of positively chronotropic factor, and parasympathetic nervous system is an example of negatively chronotropic factor. So this was some introductory portion in SA nodal action potential. So if we write this in university examination, this is the theory part. SA node action potential is exclusively for heart rate generation, and therefore SA node is known as dominant pacemaker of heart, highest rate of impulse generation. This property of generation of heart rate is called chronotropic phenomena, and we have positively chronotropic factors and negatively chronotropic factors. Positively chronotropic factors increases heart rate, for example sympathetic nervous system, and negatively chronotropic factors decreases heart rate, for example parasympathetic nervous system. Now we go on with the ionic basis of action potential of SA node. Before we start with the ionic basis, I would like to an important information for my students, that do subscribe my channel. It gives me more motivation to make more videos. Now let's begin with action potential of SA node ionic basis. This action potential of SA node can be studied in three phases: 1, 2, and 3. First phase is known as pre-potential phase, also known as phase 4. Second phase is called a depolarization phase or phase 0. Third is known as the repolarization phase or phase 3. Let us see these phases one by one with diagrammatic representation. This right here is an SA nodal fiber. This right here is an SA nodal fiber. And inside the membrane of the fiber, there is presence of lot of negative ions. So inside it is negatively charged. And outside there is presence of lot of positive charges. So outside is positively charged. Clear? Now we are measuring the voltage across this membrane. We have one electrode here and one electrode here. When we put electrode here inside of the membrane, inside the membrane of this nodal fiber, we saw inside it is negatively charged. It is negatively charged approximately about minus 60 millivolt on an electrode. Clearly, it is negatively charged approximately up to minus 60 millivolts. Clear? Now on the membrane of the SA nodal fiber, we saw there is presence of some channels. This is one channel and this is another channel. Clearly, this channel is known as calcium T type of channels, and this channel is known as sodium F type of channels. Sodium F type of channels. Is that clear? Through these channels, sodium comes inside, and through these channels, calcium comes inside. Clear? So through these channels, sodium is coming in, and through these channels, calcium is coming in. These sodium F channels and calcium T channels, these are leaky channels. These are leaky channels, which means we are not giving any stimulus to this acinodal fiber. We are not giving any stimulus to this acinodal fiber. These leaky channels function on their own. That means sodium and calcium keep coming inside this nodal fiber on its own. Clear? So now we will plot this electrical activity, this coming of sodium and calcium on a graph. So this right here is on y-axis. Y-axis we have millivolt, so we have voltage. On x-axis we have time. Clear? So initially inside the fiber was minus 60 millivolt. So on y-axis we have millivolts. So initially the fiber was minus 60 millivolts. Now what happens is, due to the entry of the sodium and due to this entry of this calcium, this negative gets neutralized by the sodium and calcium. When this negative gets neutralized, it becomes minus 50, then it becomes minus 45, then it becomes minus 40. So it becomes towards less negative value because of the presence of the sodium and calcium, because the sodium and calcium neutralizes this negative. So with time, when time passes by, this minus 60, it goes on decreasing, it becomes minus 50, then it becomes minus 40 millivolts. So with time, this minus 60 becomes minus 50, then minus 40, because of the entry of the sodium and calcium. Is that clear? So initially it was minus 60, now it reaches to minus 40 millivolts. With time voltage keeps on decreasing. Is that clear? So now this minus 60, it goes on to minus 40 millivolt. Is that clear? Because of the why? Because of the entry of the sodium and because of the entry of the calcium. This phase from this minus 60 millivolt to minus 40 millivolt is called the pre-potential phase, or phase 0 of action potential. So in pre-potential phase or phase 4 of action potential, there is entry of sodium and there is entry of calcium. That is, there is sodium influx and calcium influx. Clear? Now moving forward. Now inside of the membrane is minus 40 millivolt. When this membrane senses that the membrane is minus 40, when this membrane senses that inside the potential is minus 40 volts, there is opening of lot of other channels. These channels are known as calcium L type of channels, and because of calcium L type of channels, they are opened at minus 40 millivolt. There is lot of calcium influx. Is that clear? Now this calcium comes inside and it neutralizes this minus 40 value. It goes to minus 30, then minus 20, then minus 10, then 0, then plus 10. So this calcium influx, it neutralizes this minus 40, and let's suppose it takes it to plus 10 millivolts value. Is that clear? So now at 40 millivolts, there is an opening of another type of channels. Those are known as calcium L type of channels. And due to opening of the calcium L type of channels, with time, this potential goes to plus 10 millivolts. So potential increases. It goes to minus 40, then minus 30, then minus 20, then minus 10, then 0, then plus 10. Is that clear? And this phase of action potential from minus 40 millivolts to plus 10 millivolt is called depolarization phase, or phase 0. So this was the depolarization phase or phase 0, second phase. It is because of the entry of calcium, but this entry is through L type of calcium channels. So there is calcium entry through L type of calcium channels. As you can see here, there are two types of calcium channels in heart: calcium T type of channels and calcium L type of channels. Calcium T type of channels are open in pre-potential phase, while as calcium L type of channels are open in depolarization phase. Is that clear? Now an important point is of this minus 40 millivolt. This value is very important. As you can see, these calcium L type of channels, they open when the inside potential is minus 40 millivolts. They do not open at minus 60 millivolt. They do not open at minus 30 millivolt. At minus 50 millivolt. They only open at minus 40 millivolt. So this minus 40 millivolt is known as firing level or threshold potential. Because at this potential, these L type of calcium opens. There are a lot of calcium channels, calcium L type, they open at a time. So they takes potential minus 40 to plus 10. So this is the depolarization phase. Now moving on towards the next phase of the action potential. Clear? Now the potential is minus plus 10. Now when the membrane senses that inside potential is plus 10, there is opening of another type of channels. Clear? These channels are potassium channels, and they cause the exit of the potassium. And simultaneously there is closure of the calcium L type of channels. So when the membrane potential becomes plus 10, there is opening of lot of potassium channels, and potassium goes out, and there is the closure of the calcium L type of channels. When this positive charge is leaving the cell, so inside it is positive, so it goes towards back towards the minus 60 value, because there is loss of positive charge. So the inside potential goes back from plus 10 to minus 60. So at plus 10, there is closure of these L type of calcium channels, and there is the opening of the potassium channels, and it takes membrane potential from plus 10 millivolts back to the minus 60 millivolts. And this phase is known as repolarization phase, or phase 3. Is that clear? Is that clear? So these are the three phases of action potential and their ionic basis: pre-potential phase, phase 4, depolarization phase, phase 0, and repolarization phase, phase 3. Now moving on to more important thing. In this repolarization phase, from plus 10 millivolts, this potassium keeps on leaking. But with the time, with increasing time, there is decrease of exit of potassium. There is a decrease of exit of potassium. So this minus 60, so at this minus 60, this potassium keeps on decreasing. Clear? Why doesn't the potential go below down to minus 70? Because there are presence of sodium and calcium leaky channels. They cause the entry of the calcium and the entry of the sodium. As a result, new prepotential begins. Is that clear? So when the new prepotential begins, there are three things: sodium entry, calcium entry, and there is one more thing: there is decrease in potassium efflux. Because potassium keeps on decreasing. Potassium is going out, but it keeps on decreasing with time. And in prepotential, there is a lot of decrease in potassium exit. Is that clear? So in prepotential phase, there is not only the calcium and sodium entry, there is always also another thing happening, that is decrease in potassium efflux. Is that clear? So this is all about the three phases of action potential. Now we will revise. Number first is the prepotential phase. It's phase 0. It is from minus 60 millivolt to minus 40 millivolt. It is because of the movement of three ions: calcium influx through T type of calcium channels. Here are those channels. Sodium influx through funny current through funny channels, sodium F. And there is decrease in the potassium efflux that we see, because there is with time there is decrease in potassium efflux. Then we have the depolarization phase. That's from minus 40 millivolt to plus 10. It is because of the calcium entry through L type of calcium channels. And then repolarization phase, it is because of the potassium exit. Now we will talk about the naming of these phases. Listen. Initially, before the start of the action potential, inside the membrane was negative and outside the membrane was positive. Clear? Now when the depolarization happened, inside became positively charged, plus 10. Inside became positively charged. So this negative charge initially was inside, it became positive charge inside. So in depolarization, there was loss of polarity. So in phase 0, there was loss of polarity. That's why it is called a depolarization phase. Depolarization means loss in polarity, because initially it was inside negative, then it became inside positive. So it is known as loss of polarity. Depolarization means loss of polarity. Now, when from plus 10 it goes back to minus 60. Clear? So this positive was plus 10, it goes back to minus 60. Now this phase is known as repolarization phase. Why repolarization phase? Repolarization means regaining of polarity. It regains its original polarity. Which was its original polarity? Inside negative, outside positive. So regaining of polarity. Is that clear? Now this potassium goes out and it takes potential from plus 10 millivolt to minus 60 millivolt. Why doesn't the potential go to minus 70, then minus 80? Why doesn't that happen? Because there is presence of these sodium and calcium leaky channels, which take potential back to the threshold, of minus 40. So this potassium efflux does not take the membrane to hyperpolarization state. Hyperpolarization means very much polarity, because there is presence of sodium and calcium influx through these two channels. Is that clear? Now one last point, and we will discuss, and with that we will close our topic, that this phase minus 60 to minus 40 millivolt, this phase of action potential is known as prepotential phase. It is also known as restless membrane potential. Why is it known as restless membrane potential? Because SA node generates heart rate, that we saw in the previous minutes. So if SA node generates heart rate, we do not give any external stimulus. How does it generate heart rate? It generates heart rate because of the presence of these sodium funny channels and calcium channels. Because they are leaky, we do not give any stimulus from outside, they function on their own. They take the potential from -60 to -40 millivolt to threshold clearly. So that is why this phase is known as restless membrane potential, because we do not give external stimulus and it functions on its own. It functions on its own. Clear? If we talk about the ventricular muscle fiber, we give an external stimulus. When we give external stimulus, then the membrane potential is reached at threshold. But here we don't give any external stimulus. Because of the presence of these sodium and calcium leaky channels, it reaches to threshold on its own. That is why SC node does not have that's why SC node has restless membrane potential. While as in ventricular muscle fiber, this restless membrane potential is not present. There is presence of resting membrane potential, because we have to give external stimulus to reach to -40 millivolt value. Is that clear? So this pre-potential is also known as restless membrane potential. Thank you very much. Dr. Ugwe here. Keep revising, keep studying, like, share, subscribe this channel, and thank you very much. Class dismissed.